Very well. So in this video, we're going to talk about yet another component of the class construction. No pun intended. It so happens that what we're going to be talking about here is going to be constructors. Well, what a constructor does essentially is it constructs the object. When we are creating objects, we need a way to construct them, which means to give a decent state that can be usable for that object. What I mean by that is this. When we looked at our microphone class, so when we said at the bottom here, we said mic is equal new microphone, we're creating an instance of a microphone. We're creating the actual object, microphone, the real thing, okay? But at this point, this mic is just a spot or a place in memory. So it doesn't really have a state, if you will. It doesn't have any attributes, doesn't have any properties of any sort. Okay, it's just a generic object. It isn't until we say mic, in this case, that name, and we set it to Blue Yeti, and color, we set the color to silver gray, model to 1345, and so forth. Okay. So this construction of the object to actually give it a state is what we call constructing our object. This is, of course, a good way to construct our object, which is to directly add properties to our object. But there's also another way to do so. So this other form of constructing our object, right, on creation is called construct. So a constructor is a function-like entity that usually has the class name which constructs the object. The good thing about using an IDE is that it gives all the tools that we need to do things. In this case, I could go and say command N. The moment I do that, there is all sort of things that we can actually take advantage of, some of which we haven't really talked about that much. Look at this. They have the constructor. They have this what they call named constructor. In the beginning, I'm going to just go ahead and use just the constructor instead of named. Let's use the constructor like that. And of course, this happens, which means what are the attributes we're going to pass to construct our object? Well, in this case, we're going to pass all of them, okay? So check all of them, say okay, and there we go. Like I said, we now have our constructor. Now, this is can be a little bit confusing. Usually, a constructor, when you create a constructor, you just go and say microphone, in this case, and then you pass string. I can go ahead and say, for instance, name, string, color, and then int model as such. Because it is a function like, but it's not necessarily a function. Let me go ahead and comment this out, that way we don't have issues. So it looks like a function, but it is not a function per se. You notice it has the same name as the class. This just tells the compiler that this is a constructor. Actually, it is a function, but let's not call it a function. Let's call it a constructor. That way we can differentiate it. Okay. So now inside of our constructor here, this is where we construct our object. Remember, the reason why this has the same name as the class, if you go down here where we instantiate it, you notice that we say new microphone, and then we have this operator, function operator, which means we are actually calling our constructor. I can promise you that is true because now that we've created this constructor, which we are forcing our object on creation to pass in name, color, and model. Now we're having a problem here which says it requires 3 arguments. You see? So that means if we don't create explicitly, if you don't create a constructor, the Dart language, the Dart compiler creates one for us. Okay, which is a default one which doesn't pass anything implicitly. Okay, the moment you could actually explicitly create one, let me uncomment this, then you notice we're going to have an issue here. But okay, let's focus here. So what are we doing when we construct? We are constructing our object, which means the moment we say new microphone to create that object, we need to pass a few things. Now, for that to work, we have to set up whatever our instance variables are inside here. So now I'm going to go ahead and say use the keyword this. Now, what does this mean? The keyword this. Well, this means this object or class. Okay, not very helpful. Well, Okay, so imagine here, what are we trying to do? Notice we have this string name, color, and model. You notice something very interesting here is that all of them, they're also, all of our attributes here at the top, they're also named the same thing. We have name, color, model. Well, again, the idea of constructing our object or our class here is that we want to make it so that all these attributes have some values, right? Because if we don't construct it, then they will just be null, which is really no use to us in the long run. This means in our constructor then, whatever we pass when we construct our object here, we have to pass something to set our attributes to have certain values. Now, the problem here, you notice real quick, if I go ahead and say I want to set this name to whatever name we're getting here, if I go ahead and say name is equal to name to set it, now we're going to have a problem because we're saying this name, which is being passed here, is going to be equal to this name also. So it makes no sense because we are not setting this parameter to itself. We want to set the name, which is the attribute or the instance variable, to whatever we're passing here when we are constructing our object or instantiating it. That's where we have to say, well, okay, what we're trying to set up here in our constructor is actually this attribute here, this instance variable. That's why we say this name is equal to name. Now, this name here is indeed the instance variable or member variable that we're setting. See? This then means what? It means microphone object. So anytime you see this keyword, you are referring to this object that you are in. Okay, so now we've set this name here to whatever we pass. So when we instantiate and we pass James, then that means the microphone now, it will be the same as if we were to say Mike.name is equal to James. Okay, let's keep going so we can see. I'm going to say this, that color. I'm going to set it to color that we're passing. And this, that model, I'm going to pass to model that we pass, just like that. Now we have a constructor. Now this is not the Dart way of doing this, but I just want to show you so you see the mechanics behind once we actually revise this code. All right, so notice we have those errors because we have a contract here. Now we have an explicit a constructor which requires name, color, and model, which means we have to validate that. We have to make sure that we follow those rules because we said that we have to pass those arguments. Okay, in this case, I'm just going to pass Blue Yeti. So it's actually the same thing. However, it's going to be different. I'm going to say silver, gray. I think that's how you spell gray. And then I'm going to pass 1, 3, 3, 5, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And now I don't need this because now I've just said when I construct my object, okay, when I instantiate it, I want to make sure that it comes in right away with the name, the color, and the model. And anything else stays the same, which means if I run this, I should have the same results. Nothing really has changed. The names, everything is working as they were working before. But one thing we know it changed is that we actually explicitly created a constructor. Perfect. So in one of those classes that you created before, such as person or employee or a car, I want you to do the same thing. Go ahead and create a constructor and go ahead and pass all these parameters and then set them up inside of a constructor. That way, when we create those objects, we can just pass and go like that. But also notice something very interesting here. I can still override things, right? I can still, let me go ahead and comment this out. I can still go ahead and say Mike dot and add model, and I can set it to something else. Let's say I want to say one of, oops, it's not a string, it has to be an integer. Let me see if I do something like that. Okay, if you run, you notice what's going to happen. Look at that, right? The model now has changed to whatever number we added, not this one. We overrode it. Okay, So we still have that flexibility, but this allows us to create in one shot, just right away have an object that is set in memory, but also has a state, if you will. All right? Perfect. See you next.